Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining EAC's webinar today. This is Addison Tyne. I am the marketing specialist here at EAC. We will be recording the session today, so pending any technical difficulties, everyone will receive a replay of the webinar. Please feel free to drop any questions in the queue, and we will get to them after the presentation. Following the session today, a short survey will appear, so please stick around and answer those questions for us after the webinar. Today, I will start off with a short introduction of EAC, and then our technical account manager and Creo expert, Bill Schlund, will be showcasing some key features that you may have missed between Creo 4 and Creo 7. At EAC, our mission is to transform the way companies design, manufacture, connect to, and service their products. We are located all over the US, with our headquarters in Minneapolis, Minnesota. We are more than just a value-added reseller for PTC. We have been partnered with them for 20 years now, with experts in 22 areas of product development. We offer our customers everything they need for product development, from CAD and simulation software for the full product design process, software for managing service documentation, and software for managing product data. We also implement IoT and AR into business strategies to jumpstart initiatives around digital transformation, connecting all things in your company. We assist with design and engineering projects and offer webinars and PTC certified training courses for continued learning as well. Then this last slide here, we also are a commercial reseller for Formlabs, offering their latest products in 3D printing, with their latest Form 3 printer now available at packages starting as low as $34.99. All in all, we try to make sure you remember that EAC is a company to partner with to get all of the technology at the forefront of your business to help make your team successful. Now I will hand over things to Bill so he can walk us through the many possibilities available between Creo 4 and Creo 7.
Thanks, Addison. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. I am Bill Schlund, and I'll be going through really why would you want to move to Creo 7? That's something I always ask myself when a new release of Creo comes out. What's there to make me want to move forward? First of all, we take a look at the release schedule that PTC uses. They have it broken down into major releases and then minor releases. So Creo 4 was considered a major release, and you can see that that's supported out through about the middle of 2021. Creo 5, Creo 6 were minor releases. Creo 5 really isn't technically supported anymore from the standpoint of active maintenance builds being created for it. That's where that runs out. And then Creo 6 again will go out about halfway through 2021. As you can see, Creo 7 is a major release. That'll go out another 4 years after that. Again, with 8 and 9 coming after 10 being another major release. One thing to consider when moving is the time support that exists for your current release. And you want to make sure that you're always staying on a build that has maintenance releases in case you do have issues. So I'm going to go through some of the changes that have happened since Creo 4, and I'm going to focus in several areas. I'll do the PowerPoint kind of highlighting different areas, and then we'll get into Creo and kind of work through those examples. So first of all, we'll start out with part modeling. One of the things that help in the transition and just the communication of new releases coming out, there's something that you can set up under file options that allow PTC to notify you when a new maintenance build for your release comes out, just so you know when that's available. Another thing that is, as you're updating your software, loading a new version, any customized files that you've created under common files or under common files text, as you can see here, we have a variety of different file types that people typically will customize for their company. When a new release is loaded, these files are protected and then added to the new release, so there's nothing that you have to do or worry about as far as backing those up. Something new that, and this is with Creo 7, is that if you create a default part, an empty part, by default from now on, Creo will make that an absolute accuracy part. So relative accuracy, you can still do that, but by default, Creo is pushing things more and pushing the user community more to using absolute accuracy. That just saves in issues, usually for downstream applications and things like that. As we know, sheet metal is already absolute accuracy, and certainly when you go into to mold and other applications. The next thing I want to talk about is some capabilities inside Creo sketching. Now we can mirror 2D entities about linear entities and not necessarily always a center line to mirror things. We can also better visually see when things are related to one another through constraints. So for instance, here we can see we have a line that's been mirrored across here. If I put my mouse over the constraint that highlights that it's mirrored, it not only highlights that component, but its mirrored component and the thing that it's mirrored about. So we'll see that through all the constraint icons that are put up in your sketch. It'll indicate which entities that affects, which is a really good feedback mechanism. They've also improved the snapping capabilities. So snapping is basically as you're going through your sketch, it can snap to geometry that's behind the sketch. We can improve that in a way of either making it snap instantaneously or kind of a delayed snap, so it's not grabbing things right away. Or you can turn it off totally, but the thing is that you have a choice. Another thing that we can do is, I mentioned before about the icons for constraints. One of the things we can do is turn that on through a config option, as we see here, show sketcher constraints during dynamic edit. It can be yes or no. By default, it's no, as the way that Creo has always behaved. But now if I go in to change a sketch, say I want to edit the dimensions on a sketch, this is kind of, when this is set to no, when it's set to yes, we can see all the constraints come up along with the dimensions. So we can kind of see how things are related to one another if we do want to go and make some dimensional changes. Another thing that's really nice, as I've heard from a number of people, is that those constraint icons were always really small, kind of hard to see. So now there's a new thing in there where we can just actually adjust the size of the display through a little drag bar like this. So you can see initially this would be kind of the default value. Here I've cranked it up a little bit so we can see that those icons are a little bit easier to see. Some other things that help along the being able to see things more clearly and easier to work with is some of the things have been changed basically in the display standpoint. If I'm creating a feature, it has drag handles on it. The drag handles are accentuated. They're a bit brighter and bigger in diameter, or the way that they're represented, so we can more readily see these are the things that I can drag and modify to change the shape of my particular feature I'm working with. Also, another thing that was added is that the background of dimensions can be turned on. It's called dim background. You can set that to yes. And basically it puts kind of a lighter color behind that, so the dimension doesn't get lost in the background of the geometry behind it. It's a little bit easier to read it in that respect. And then finally, just when you pre-select an edge, when you move your mouse over an edge and it automatically will kind of highlight saying, okay, what do you want to do with this edge? That color and that brightness is magnified, or it's more pronounced now with the later build. So it's a little bit easier to see if you're highlighting an edge or not when you're going and creating other features. And then some things in the core modeling, if we're working with assemblies, one of the things that's been added, which really helps a lot, is if you're working with an assembly and you activate a part, before we'd always have to look for the little green star next to the part, indicating back to us that that was the active part. But now what it does is it kind of grays out all the other parts in the model tree and leaves the active part ungrayed out, the background of it. So it really accentuates in the model tree what is the active part. Again, it makes it really easy for us to see if we even have a certain part activated. Sometimes you forget, and then I got to go in there and do Control-C to get it back up to the top. But let's also talk a little bit about the model tree display. So we can create, obviously a number of different columns with different informations in those. We can turn those off and on real quickly, just with a little button that collapses or expands those for us. Also, if we do add some configurations for the columns, those are automatically stored in the .ui file. So that's the same file if you do any customizations to the user interface. those are also stored in this particular file. So the model tree.cfg file is no longer needed. You can still have it, but basically all your changes that you've made in the model trees have been or will be stored in the .ui file. So let's move on from that. Other things that have been added in the model tree, before we could always just turn something off or on, shade or show it or not show it, basically hide or unhide. Now we can say show only, which is sort of like isolate. We're familiar with that maybe from Creo View, where you can pick on a component and say isolate it. That's the only component that we see. Everything else is hidden. And we could say show everything except what I selected. And this is going by type. And I'll go through an example, you can see that. But basically, if I have a bunch of datum planes, I can say, show me just this datum plane, turn all the others off. That's basically what I mean by type, all the datum planes, all the datum points, things like that. Another thing that they've been adding is, we noticed Creo have been maturing since Creo 4 with a lot of the right mouse button menus. They've added additional menus for other features. So as they kind of are brought into the fold, we can see more capabilities just at our mouse button, and we don't have to go up to the feature bar anymore to do things if we do not want to. Again, that's applied to 2D and 3D annotations, to the style feature, and also to rounds and chamfers. So we'll see that we have extra capabilities right at our mouse tip to make modifications to those features, as opposed to, like I said, going up to the toolbar. And again, it's to save in mouse travel and things like that. Some other things that have been added, brand new feature called a 3D sweep. It's a helical sweep. So if you're making milling tools or drill bits or things like that, where basically that geometry is created by a cutting wheel, we could say. What it's doing is it's replicating that solid and then helically sweeping it around the workpiece, removing material. That gives you a different result than what you would get if you're just sweeping a 2D profile, because there's material being cut in front of that profile and material being cut behind that profile. It gives you a different shape. So this is very accurate representation of what really happens real world. Then also some draft has changed, which is really nice, where if you find out that you need to put some draft on a particular area, but you already got rounds and chamfers on there, what it does is it'll highlight those rounds and chamfers when you go to say, I want to add the draft. And it's basically indicating back to you that you can add the draft, and then those rounds and chamfers will be reapplied back onto those edges. So it allows us to be, the best practice still is, right? Put the draft on first and then the rounds, but sometimes that's not possible. And maybe sometimes you're working with imported geometry, right? You import the geometry, all the rounds are already there anyway, and you still might want to add some draft. You can do that very easily with the draft feature now. And also the draft feature can allow you to add draft to existing draft or onto a geometry that's already built in with draft, say like a cone or something like that. It's already got an angle to it, but we could add draft to that should we want to. So very robust. And then finally over here, mirroring features. Before it would just kind of highlight over where the mirrored features would be. Now it gives you an exact representation of what those mirrored features would be. And we can add and remove those features if we are mirroring multiple features at a time. Something new that's been added is pretty useful. It's called sketch regions, where we could have a sketch that has a bunch of geometry in it, but then we can just pick different areas of the sketch to use in our extrude or our revolve or our sweep. Whereas before, that type of sketch really wouldn't be valid. We'd have to go in and say use certain edges in order to get what we wanted. Now we can just say sketch regions and pick different areas. You can hold your control button down and pick multiple areas to create the profile that you're going to be using in your feature. And then something new that's been added is point projection. So just as we had a datum plane and we could say make a plane that's midway between two other planes or surfaces, we could say now we can create a point and we can say project that point onto something else. Project it onto a plane, onto a surface, onto a curve. It projects it on and makes it normal to that entity that you select. So projected point's pretty useful. So you can see that's just an option in the pull down. And then there's been another config option that's been added. Whenever we would put in a standard hole it would always put in a drill angle of 118 degrees, which is standard. But there's a config option now that you can preset that to any value that you want. You can still always go in and manually change it after it's in, but or before actually in the shape portion pull down of the toolbar, but we can set that there. And then finally, one thing that's been asked, I know for a long time from, like the ID guys and things like that, is we want to be able to design in perspective mode. So just up in the graphics toolbar, there's a button now, you click that, it turns on perspective mode, and you can continue modeling, but you always have perspective mode turned on. It doesn't have to be something you turn on at the end. And then with the freestyle feature, some things have been added. When freestyle features start to get a little bit more complex, the network around those that we use to make modifications to those surfaces, it's kind of hard to see exactly if they're overlapping and things like that. So one of the things we can do is called box creation mode, but basically it fills in that net around the part. And now if we pull on that net, we can see which face we're grabbing and we can pull that out or which edge. It just is another way of working with usually more complex geometry. And then another thing, we could always, with the freestyle, align it to a curve, but now we can align it to a curve and then add a draft direction and add draft to it. So this is getting more and more powerful as time goes on. So let's stop doing PowerPoints for a little while and let's look at some Creo functionality. So here I have a part that I've called up here, and this is an imported part, right? So it's just a big blob, right? Imported geometry. So let's start off talking about some things that we can do here. I'm going to go in and I'm going to say, let's redefine this sketch that we have right now. We'll kind of look at it right now, and I'll say, let's create some other geometry for that sketch. So I'll say, maybe let's put a circle here, and then maybe we'll put in a line. I'll say, let's put in a line, maybe something like this. So now I have a circle, I have a linear line, and what we can do is make use of the new mirroring capability. So I'm going to pick on our circle, our smaller one here, and I'm just going to say, let's mirror it about this line. And we can see that it's mirrored a copy of that. And obviously, if I pick on this and make it bigger or smaller, it copies that. But now watch what happens. As I take this and I move him, you notice that the line is moving? So the line stays, it's not locked at this point. And as I move the circles closer together, the line stays halfway between those. So that's another capability, something. And if we're using this mirrored about a linear entity, it can actually move that entity around should we want that to happen. Another thing I can do is just pick on it. And you can see there's a little lock symbol here. Now I can lock it. And so what that does is now I can take my curve here and move them up, and now it behaves the way it has before, right? So that now it's locked. Now when I move an entity, the mirrored entity moves with it. Let's kind of place these guys maybe right here for now, and this will be our sketch. And I'm just going to go and add in a couple of points on here so that we can leverage those points in the future. Oh, one thing I also wanted to highlight, you'll notice that the icons here, here's one for equal. If I select on that, it highlights both circles, right? Because their radiuses or diameters are equal. If I hit the mirror representation or put my mouse over it, you can see both circles represented are controlled by this mirror, and also it's highlighting the line that they're mirrored about, right? So that's some of the things. And again, remember I also said you can change the size of these icons, so you don't have to put your reading glasses on to see them anymore. So this will be our sketch. Let's take this and make use of it. So one of the things I mentioned also was sketched areas. So it's in the pull down here, right? Sketch region. So I'm going to select on that. And I really want to extrude this stuff out. So you'll notice that as I pass my mouse over these, it's highlighting each one of these sections. So what I can do is pick on one section. I want to extrude everything here. So I'm just holding my control button down and saying, let's grab all of this and we'll extrude that out. So we'll create our extrude. I'm just going to flip it over and maybe make it more of a cutout like we see here. One of the things you'll notice, you notice that the dimension here has a little white background. Again, I have that turned on, so it's a little bit easier for me to see that. Again, if this is a darker background, I'd really need it, right? Because we have a dark dimension and we have a dark background, but you can see how that has changed. So let's continue on a little bit. I'm gonna go and put in a hole. We can put it in that sketch point that I put in there. And it's just way too big. You notice the drag handle is real easy for me to see right there, that drag handle. And then the other one down below right here, specifying the depth, but we'll say, let's make the depth maybe like 1/4 of an inch. Now, if we look down at the hole that we're seeing, let's make it a standard hole. We put a drill point there. If we look over at the shape, you notice that the dimension down here is 125, which isn't the default 118 that we've always had in the past. So I did put in that config option, and I said I want my standard drill tip to be at 125, and it will be, going forward until I either change my config or modify it here. So now we have a hole. I'm just going to say Control C, Control V, just copy and paste them over in this location. So now we have 2 holes placed. Let's place maybe a third one in the middle. Make him a little bit smaller, and again, we'll make the depth maybe 0.3. So now I have a couple features here. I'm going to go on. You'll notice as I'll switch it over back to geometry here. So I highlight an edge. It's pretty bright. It highlights it brighter than it has in the past as far as which edge I'm selecting here. But in this particular edge, I'm going to select on him, and I'll say let's put in a round. And here we can see the round. If I hit my right mouse button, you can see I have different options here, different blending of the round if I have one. Here we can make it a chordal round, we can make it up to a curve. So all the different options that I have over here are now right at my mouse tip. So again, that's for rounds and chamfers and basically a lot of features that we have right now. So I've created a series of features here, and maybe I want to go and mirror these, right? Because we talked about being able to mirror features. So I have a plane sitting here. And so I'm going to grab these features. I'll say, let's mirror the extrude. Let's, control button, big hole on the round, right? So we've selected all of those. I'll say, let's mirror them about this plane that I have here. You'll notice that the preview is real crisp and clear exactly what I'm getting here. And it's previewing it there for me. I'll say, sure, that's good. And now kind of thinking about it a little bit more, it's like, maybe I should have included these other guys with it. So I can go back and redefine that mirror. And if we look under its references, we can see that it's included those 3, and you notice they're grayed out right now. But I can use this little button up here called reapply. It means I want to change these references that I have here. And now I can say, let's include the other 2 holes. And you can see as I choose them, they're automatically being added over here in the mirrored side. So again, I can add and remove from this list anytime that I want to make things a little bit easier. So another thing that I wanted to talk about a little bit is draft. So this part right now is an imported part, right? So it's just a topology part, but you'll notice that there's draft already on the surfaces here. Obviously this guy does, but here it's actually uniform draft of 5 degrees. But let's say that I wanted to make a change to that. So I can just go over here to our draft feature and pick on a surface that I want to draft. And then we'll say our hinge is the bottom of this part. You notice that it comes in and says, yep, I found 5 degrees. It's uniform all the way across here. And it's highlighting the rounds, saying that if you want to change that, you can do that, no problem. And we'll just make it like 8 degrees right now. But it then reapplies those rounds on top of that. And we can see that automatically added for us. So another thing that we might want to do is, let's look at this boss that we have up here, this little area. This guy, this surface, and this surface are both at 10 degrees. This back one is at 0, and this front one is at 35. But if I go in and say I want to add draft to this, I'll show you kind of behavior of how this works. It says, yep, I found this, and it's at your 10 degrees, like you said. And I haven't told it to make it 10, it just said I found it at 10. Now I'm going to say, under the references, I want to include this surface right here. with the other guys that are at 10. As soon as I select him, it puts them all at 0. It's like, well, why did it do that? Well, the thing is that I never specified a draft angle that I want them to be at. It just said I found 10. And then I added another one that wasn't 10. So the default is I'm going to make them all 0. And now you make those 3 references what you want. So I'm going to go in and show you something else. So I'm going to go and remove this last surface that I did, right? So we'll say remove him right now. So I have these 2 guys at 10 degrees. If I take that 10 and I type in 10, now I'm telling the system that I want it to be 10, not that it's just finding 10. Now if I go over and say under references, I want to include this guy, it puts him at 10 because I've hard-coded in that number that this is the value that I want. In fact, if I go to this one over here with 0, and I select on him, it makes him at 10 as well. So just a kind of a little way that it behaves. If you give it a number, it'll make all the surfaces you select that number. If you have it just find something, you can just change the dimensions that way. But if you add something that doesn't have that value, it'll reset it back to 0. One of the things I brought up as well is the model tree. So we can see the model tree here. I have feature numbers and feature names and things like that. Here's a little button here so I can expand or collapse that anytime that I want. One of the things as well that I wanted to bring up real quickly is I can take this plane and I'm going to say, let's pattern that. We'll pattern it maybe, let's say 0.5, like a ½ an inch. And we'll maybe make like 5 of them. Say, okay. So now I have 5 planes out here. One of the things I could do is maybe I'm just working on this plane right now because it's going to cross here and I need it. I can just select on him. Instead of just saying hide all the other ones, I just say, let's isolate him, show only him, and only that one is displayed. Or I could say, select on him and say, show me all the planes in this part except for that one. Right? So those are some of the capabilities that exist here. Let's kind of turn that off. Let's go back to our PowerPoint here for a second. Sheet metal, some things have changed. A couple of things I want to highlight here is that if we add a wall and there's already an existing wall, it can merge into that wall. It can allow you to put in corner relief and corner seams and things like that. Before you used to have to, remember, use a a flange wall. You'd pick multiple edges and put it on before. Also, if we have a form here that overlaps over the edge, we can have an option in here to shear the edges to make it straight. It also supports multi-body, which is something I'll talk about in a minute. But multi-body means we can have multiple bodies in the same PRT file. And then when we make a flat pattern, we could always make it as a family table instance, but we can now make it as a simplified rep version as well. So let's take a look at a sheet metal part here just for a second. This is a flat wall that I have over here, but I can come over and say I want to put in another flat wall, and I'll put it here. You notice that it automatically sees the other wall and now allows me to start modifying the seam. Another thing that I mentioned was putting in a form. So I'll put in like a sketch form on this face. Let's say, let's make a circle, something like this. And we'll extend that up and add in some options for rounds. Say, okay. So here's our form that's kind of running off the edge, as we can see here. One of the things that I can do is take a look at the flattened version of it. If we see there, you can see it kind of makes that. And that's just because the geometry is that way, right? As we can see here. Also, this last one over here is create a representation, right? Simplified rep of this. So this flat pattern would actually be a simp rep as opposed to an instance, which is this guy. But one of the options I can do with this form feature is, let's redefine him for a second. Under options, I could say, we can see how this is kind of wavy. I can say, let's use that shear option. And when we do that, you notice it makes it perfectly straight, and that in turn makes our flat pattern perfectly straight. Right. In detailing, some things have been added. Not really a whole lot as far as just dimensioning and things like that, but you can have information about a particular view either pop up under info or as even a mouse tip telling you about that view, what scale it's at, what the parents are, things like that. We can add drawing tree columns in a drawing to give us more information about the particular parts that are there. Also, when we have ordinate dimension, we can either have them aligned to the baseline, the 0 dimension, or not. So that's a yes or no. That's in the DTL file. And then we can control the intersected length, as we can see in this corner down here. By default, it's like 1/8 of an inch, but we can extend that or make it smaller if we want to do that. One of the things I thought was kind of interesting is this improved hidden line removal. A lot of times when we use press fits or inserts or things like that where the surfaces kind of overlap, the hidden line removal doesn't work necessarily really good on that. So let me show you an example of something like that. And we're gonna use multi-body to begin with too, just to do something different. But I'm gonna say, let's do an extrude, and we'll just say, let's make a circle right here. So let's say this will be a shaft that we want to create. And we'll say, let's flip that around. And we'll make the shaft go out the bottom here, and we won't have it remove material. So we have that. Now, one of the options, every feature that creates geometry will allow me this body options. So we have body 1, that's our main part that we have here. And this will add it to body 1. So basically we'd be making a big boss sticking out. But I'm gonna say create a brand new part. It's gonna call it like body 2. So now there's actually 2 separate parts here. And if we look under our model tree, under bodies, we can see we have the base one, and we have this guy. I can just say, let's go in and we could say rename him maybe and just call it like the shaft, a shaft part. I could also go in and add materials to him. So we could say, let's see here, assign materials. I could say, let's make the shaft steel. So these different bodies can have different material properties, right? Which is kind of a real world thing. If you have a press fit or something like that, it could be a different material. One of the things I'll also do with this shaft part, let's just change his color right now. I'll just say, let's make the default color for body 2. All right. So this is what I was getting at before with the hidden line, is when we have 2 surfaces laying on top of each other, you can kind of see that software is kind of saying, well, I don't know really who wins. So it kind of lets them both win. When we make a drawing and we do hidden line removal, sometimes that same issue applies. So let me go in real quickly and say, let's make a drawing. And we'll say, one of the things I can do is say, make the drawing use the same name as the model, little checkbox here. So I don't have to worry about that. And I'm going to say, let's use a template. Let's say our working directory. Oh. Use this template here, put our part in there. So it's just going to put it in here. You'll notice that now in the shaded view of the part, you notice that it is all cleared up. And in fact, if I go in and say, let's do the view display and let's make it hidden line or no hidden, it's nice and crisp. Where typically we might have had some issues with that. So that's just one of the things that it does. Interestingly enough, is there are 2 bodies here. This is a single PRT file, but I can still put a bill of material in here that says one is the base casting, one is the shaft. They have different materials. I can apply different parameters to them. They're basically kind of 2 separate parts. I can extract them as individual parts, should I want to. But anyway, that's something new. We'll be talking about in a future, more in depth, certainly, in a future webinar. But let's go back to our point here. Augmented reality, that was out, but now we can do it from a lot of different places, right? So not only if we're in Creo Parametric, but if we're in Elements Direct or Windchill or Creo View, we can create an AR experience by taking our assembly or our part, publishing it out into the cloud. It'll send us back a link, and then using Vuforia View, which is a free app, we can call that up on our phone or our tablet or something like that, spin it around, maybe see explode states, things like that. In fact, one of the things, speaking of explode states, is we can publish out those combination states. So we could publish out, a simplified rep that is exploded in a certain way or something like that. So something new that's been added with the AR. Again, that's all free, right? It's built in with Creo. Weld has been changed. Here's an example of Creo 6, a weld going around a corner that isn't exactly 90 degrees. And you can see it leave little gaps. Now, with the newer version in Creo 7, certainly, it makes this nice, neat corner. Also, you couldn't put a weld between two parts that weren't touching. Now, that's not a problem. Rendering, this would be the capabilities that we have with KeyShot. Some things have been added to it as we're bringing in more and more KeyShot capabilities. So we have some ray tracing. In Mannequin, you could look through the mannequin's eyes and see things. Well, now you can render what the mannequin sees if you wanted to do that. Another thing I thought was kind of nice is the floor plane. Before, it would always kind of find a floor and put it there. Now we can specify a plane and say, I want the floor to be there. We could move the plane way out of the view and say we want the floor there, and then the part looks like it's kind of maybe floating, which some people like. Here's the multi-body I talked about. A lot of different things. We'll talk about this in a future webinar, but lots of different ways of taking and making use of multi-body technology. If you've used other CAD systems, potentially you might have been exposed to this before, but now it's core into Creo. It's not another module or anything like that. It's just part of the core capability of Creo. Then, just to finish up, there's some new modules that have been added. So there's a new machining module. Creo manufacturing has always been really good at creating a optimized tool path. If I have to, cut 1,000 parts, this is going to save me a lot of time by optimizing the tool path, and I'll be able to get that done faster. Well, some people just say, I just need a part or a couple of parts to make really quick. I need to remove as much material as humanly possible as fast as you can. PTC has entered into an agreement with ModuleWorks, and this particular software is very good at doing high-speed machining and removing a lot of material as quickly as possible. So specifically for the mold industry. Also, there's computational fluid dynamics that allows us to do CFD analysis. There's 3 different packages with that. So the first one does flow, heat, turbulence, and then a little higher capability version, the plus version, allows us to do radiation, species, and a sliding mesh. And then finally, the high end, the premium end, allows us to do cavitation, multi-phase, dynamics, things like that. So really, really high end. Again, it works in Creo, totally built in to the Creo interface, and it works really fast, surprisingly fast for all the stuff that it's doing. Speaking of fast, Creo Simulation Live, the only capability that exists in the industry right now, allow you to do this. It uses the power of ANSYS, the ANSYS solver, working with the Creo model to do structural, modal, transient thermal, and then there's a new module coming out, I think in the second or the next release, maintenance build of 7, which will do flow analysis as well. So this is doing it real time. It uses your GPU, so it doesn't slow Creo down at all. It's working on the graphics card. So you do need a pretty decent graphics card to do that, but it solves on the graphics card, so you can keep modeling while you are getting feedback as to if those changes that you're making in your modeling is affecting this in a positive way or a negative way, giving you, kind of guiding you through the design process. You still would do a full-fledged analysis at the end, most likely, but this is giving you a really good indication as to the direction for your design to go. And then finally, something new that's been added. A couple years ago, PTC bought a company called Frustum, and they do topology of geometry. So call it GTO, not like the muscle car, but what it does is this generative topology optimization allows us to take geometry and specify different loads and constraints on that geometry, and then change the remaining material. You choose what material to change, but according to different manufacturing techniques. I want you to remove as much material, but I want to be able to cast this, or I want to be able to manufacture it, or I want to make it in a 3D printer, right? So it'll put all kinds of holes and squirrely pockets in there, but that you couldn't make with a mold or a casting or machining, but you can make it on a printer. So again, it removes as much material as possible, making your parts lightweight, but still keeping into account the capabilities that you want for the part to be able to work with. So that brings us to a close. I did overrun a little bit, but there are some other things going on. I'm going to turn it back to Addison to kind of wrap up.
Thanks, Bill, and thanks everyone for joining the webinar today. I don't see any questions in the queue, but I do want to let everyone know that we have extended our promotion through June on the supersized Creo. Get 50% off Creo extensions. We'll be providing a link to this promotion in the follow-up email being sent out later this afternoon, so watch your email for that. Also, here is a list of our upcoming webinars for the Creo series. We hope you can join us next week for multi-body part design in Creo. And then another reminder, there will be a short survey once we end here, so please stick around and answer those questions for us. Thanks again, everyone. We hope to see you next week, and have a great rest of your day.